In our last episode, Gully Foyle's hope for rescue was dashed when a passing ship, the Vorga, ignored the unignorable distress signals he sent from the wrecked ship Nomad and passed him by. The shock and ensuing rage transformed Foyle from a passive victim of circumstance eking out his survival into a one-man juggernaut hell-bent for revenge. His newfound motivation drove him to learn and invent his way out of his predicament. He got one engine working, propelling the wreck that was left of the Nomad toward the asteroid belt. The Nomad and a barely conscious Foyle were taken by a tribe of asteroid dwellers, the self-named scientific people, descendants of an expedition wrecked there 2 centuries before. With the trappings of scientific words and procedures turned into chants and rituals, they made Foyle one of them, giving him a dwelling and a wife, which he promptly forsook in order to pursue his quest for vengeance. Instead, to the horror of the scientific people, he managed to launch one of the ships that was embedded in the asteroid, tearing it away from the surrounding structures and leaving on a heading toward the inner planets and Earth. And his ship was found by an inner planets patrol. While in medical care on the patrol ship, to his own horror, he discovered the gift of the scientific people that he could not leave behind. They had marked him with facial tattoos similar to their own, with his tribal name, Nomad, blazoned on his forehead for all to see. Once back on Earth, Foyle, now a patient in a military hospital, was enrolled in a remedial jaunting class for those who could no longer jaunt due to head injuries. His instructor, Robin Wednesbury, discovered and threatened to expose his secret, that he had recovered his jaunting abilities far earlier and was using class time to practice jaunting greater and greater distances while remaining a patient under false pretenses. Foyle was not about to allow his secret to be revealed. He attempted to bribe, then to intimidate her into keeping silent. She was having neither, despite her fear of him. We will find out exactly what he intends to do in episode 3 of The Stars, My Destination by Alfred Bester. Robin Wednesbury's apartment was in a massive building set alone on the shore of Green Bay. The apartment house looked as though a magician had removed it from a city residential area and abandoned it amidst the Wisconsin pines. Buildings like this were a commonplace in the jaunting world, with self-contained heat and light plants and jaunting to solve the transportation problem. Single and multiple dwellings were built in desert, forest, and wilderness. The apartment itself was a 4-room flat, heavily insulated to protect neighbors from Robin's telescending. It was crammed with books, music, paintings, and prints, all evidence of the cultured and lonely life of this unfortunate wrong-way telepath. Robin jaunted into the living room of the apartment a few seconds after Foyle, who was waiting for her with ferocious impatience.
So, now you know for sure.
He seized her arm in a painful grip.
But you ain't gonna tell nobody in the hospital about me, Miss Robin. Nobody.
Let go of me,
Robin lashed him across his face.
beast, savage. Don't you dare touch me.
Foyle released her and stepped back. The impact of her revulsion made him turn away angrily to conceal his face.
So, you've been malingering. You knew how to jaunt. You've been jaunting all the while you've been pretending to learn in the primer class, taking big jumps around the country, around the world for all I know.
Yeah. I go from Times Square to Columbus Circle by way of most anywhere, Miss Robin.
And that's why you're always missing. But why? Why? What are you up to?
An expression of possessed cunning appeared on the hideous face.
I'm holed up in General Hospital, me. It's my base of operations, see? I'm settling something, Miss Robin. I got a debt to pay off, me. I had to find out where a certain ship is. Now I gotta pay her back. Now I rot you, Vorga. I kill you, Vorga. I kill you, filthy.
He glared at her in wild triumph. Robin backed away in alarm.
For God's sake, what are you talking about?
Vorga. Vorga T1339. Ever hear of her, Miss Robin? I found out where she is from Bonus and Wig's ship registry. Bonus and Wig are out in San Fran. I went there, me, the time when you was learning us to cross down jaunt stages. Went out to San Fran, me. Found Vorga, me. She's in Vancouver's shipyards. She's owned by Prestane of Prestane. Heard of him, Miss Robin? Prestane's the biggest man on Terra, is all. But he won't stop me. I'll kill Vorga filthy, and you won't stop me neither, Miss Robin.
Foyle thrust his face close to hers.
Because I cover myself, Miss Robin. I cover every weak spot down the line. I got something on everybody who could stop me before I kill Vorga, including you, Miss Robin. Yeah, I found out where you live. They know up at the hospital. I come here and look around. I read your diary, Miss Robin. You got a family on Callisto, mother and 2 sisters.
For God's sake!
So, that makes you alien belligerent. When the war started, you and all the rest was given 1 month to get out of the inner planets and go home. Any which didn't became spies by law.
Foyle opened his hand.
I got you right here, girl.
He clenched his hand.
My mother and sisters have been trying to leave Callisto for a year and a half. We belong here. We...
Got you right here. You know what they do to spies? They cut information out of them. They cut you apart, Miss Robin. Take you apart piece by piece.
No, 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 oh
Foyle nodded happily and took her shaking shoulders in his hands.
I got you is all, girl. You can't even run from me, because all I gotta do is tip intelligence. And where are you? There ain't nothing nobody can do to stop me. Not the hospital or even Mr. Holy Mighty Prestane of Prestane.
Get out, you filthy, hideous thing! Get out!
You don't like my face, Miss Robin? There ain't nothing you can do about that either.
Suddenly he picked her up and carried her to a deep couch. He threw her down on the couch.
Nothing.
Devoted to the principle of conspicuous waste, on which all society is based, Prestane of Prestane had fitted his Victorian mansion in Central Park with elevators, house phones, dumbwaiters, and all the other labor-saving devices which jaunting had made obsolete. The servants in that giant gingerbread castle walked dutifully from room to room, opening and closing doors and climbing stairs. Prestane of Prestane arose, dressed with the aid of his valet and barber, descended to the morning room with the aid of an elevator, and breakfasted, assisted by a butler, footman, and waitresses. He left the morning room and entered his study. In an age when communication systems were virtually extinct, when it was far easier to jaunt directly to a person's office for a discussion than to telephone or telegraph, Prestane still maintained an antique telephone switchboard with an operator in his study.
Get me Dagenham.
The operator struggled and at last put a call through to Dagenham Couriers Incorporated. This was a 100 million credit organization of bonded jaunters guaranteed to perform any public or confidential service for any principal. Their fee was 100 per mile. Dagenham guaranteed to get a courier around the world in 80 minutes. 80 seconds after Prestain's call was put through, a Dagenham courier appeared on the private jaunt stage outside Prestain's home, was identified, and admitted through the jaunt-proof labyrinth behind the entrance. Like every member of the Dagenham staff, she was an M-class jaunter, capable of teleporting 1,000 miles a jump indefinitely, and familiar with thousands of jaunt coordinates. She was a senior specialist in chicanery and cajolery, trained to the incisive efficiency and boldness that characterized Dagenham couriers and reflected the ruthlessness of its founder.
Prestaine?
She wasted no time on protocol.
I want to hire Dagenham.
Ready, Prestaine.
Not you. I want Saul Dagenham himself.
Mr. Dagenham no longer gives personal service for less than 100,000.
The amount will be 5 times that.
Fee or percentage?
Both. $250,000 fee and $250,000 guaranteed against 10% of the total amount at risk.
Agreed. The matter?
Hire.
Spell it, please.
The name means nothing to you. Good. It will to Dagenham. Pyre, capital P-Y-R, capital E, pronounced pyre as in funeral pyre. Tell Dagenham we've located the pyre. He's engaged to get it at all costs through a man named Foyle, Gully Foyle.
The courier produced a tiny silver pearl, a memo bead, repeated Prestain's instructions into it, and left without another word. Prestaine turned to his telephone operator.
Get me Regis Sheffield.
10 minutes after the call went through to Regis Sheffield's law office, a young law clerk appeared on Prestain's private jaunt stage, was vetted, and admitted through the maze. She was a bright young woman with a scrubbed face and the expression of a delighted rabbit.
Excuse the delay, Prestaine. We got your call in Chicago, and I'm still only a D-class 500-miler. Took me a while getting here.
Is your chief trying a case in Chicago?
Chicago, New York, and Washington. He's been on the jaunt from court to court all morning. We fill in for him when he's in another court.
I want to retain him.
Honored, Prestaine. But Mr. Sheffield's pretty busy.
Not too busy for Pyre.
Sorry, sir. I don't quite...
No, you don't, but Sheffield will. Just tell him Pyre, as in funeral pyre, and the amount of his fee.
Which is?
$250,000 retainer and $250,000 guaranteed against 10% of the total amount at risk.
And what performance is required of Mr. Sheffield?
To prepare every known legal device for kidnapping a man and holding him against the Army, the Navy, and the police.
Quite. And the man?
Gully Foyle.
The law clerk muttered quick notes into a memo bead, thrust the bead into her ear, listened, nodded, and departed. Prestaine left the study and ascended the plush stairs to his daughter's suite to pay his morning respects. In the homes of the wealthy, the rooms of the female members were blind, without windows or doors, open only to the jaunting of intimate members of the family. Thus was morality maintained and chastity defended. But since Olivia Prestaine was herself blind to normal sight, she could not jaunt. Consequently, her suite was entered through doors closely guarded by ancient retainers in the Prestaine clan livery. Olivia Prestaine was a glorious albino. Her hair was white silk. Her skin was white satin. Her nails, her lips, and her eyes were coral. She was beautiful and blind in a wonderful way, for she could see only into the infrared from 7,500 angstroms to 1 millimeter wavelengths. She saw heat waves, magnetic fields, radio waves, radar, sonar, and electromagnetic fields. She was holding her grand levee in the drawing room of the suite. She sat in a brocaded wing chair, sipping tea, guarded by her dueña, holding court, chatting with a dozen women and men standing about the room. She looked like an exquisite statue of marble and coral, her blind eyes flashing as she saw and yet did not see. She saw the drawing room as a pulsating flow of heat emanations, ranging from hot highlights to cool shadows. She saw the dazzling magnetic patterns of clocks, phones, lights, and locks. She saw and recognized people by the characteristic heat patterns radiated by their faces and bodies. She saw around each head an aura of the faint electromagnetic brain pattern, and sparkling through the heat radiation of each body, the ever-changing tone of muscle and nerve. Prestane did not care for the artists, musicians, and fops Olivia kept about her, but he was pleased to see a scattering of society notables this morning. There was a Sears Roebuck, a Gillette, a young Sidney Kodak, who would one day be Kodak of Kodak, a Hubigant, Buick of Buick, and R.H. Macy XVI, head of the powerful Saxe-Gimbel clan. Prestane paid his respects to his daughter and left the house. He set off for his clan headquarters at 99 Wall Street in a coach and four driven by a coachman assisted by a groom, both wearing the Prestane trademark of red, black, and blue. That black P on a field of scarlet and cobalt was one of the most ancient and distinguished trademarks in the social register, rivaling the 57 of the Heinz clan and the RR of the Rolls-Royce dynasty in antiquity. The head of the Prestane clan was a familiar sight to New York jaunters. Iron gray hair, handsome, powerful, impeccably dressed and mannered in the old-fashioned style, Prestane of Prestane was the epitome of the socially elect, for he was so exalted in station that he employed coachmen, grooms, hostlers, stable boys, and horses to perform a function for him which ordinary mortals performed by jaunting. As men climbed the social ladder, they displayed their position by their refusal to jaunt. The newly adopted into a great commercial clan rode an expensive bicycle. A rising clansman drove a small sports car. The captain of a sept was transported in a chauffeur-driven antique from the old days, a vintage Bentley or Cadillac, or a towering Lagonda. An heir presumptive in direct line of succession to the clan chieftainship staffed a yacht or a plane. Prestane of Prestane, head of the clan Prestane, owned carriages, cars, yachts, planes, and trains. His position in society was so lofty that he had not jaunted in 40 years. Secretly, he scorned the bustling new rich like the Dagenevs and Sheffields, who still jaunted and were unshamed. Prestane entered the crenellated keep at 99 Wall Street that was Castle Prestane. It was staffed and guarded by his famous jaunt watch, all in clan livery. Prestane walked with the stately gait of a chieftain as they piped him to his office. Indeed, he was grander than a chieftain, as an importunate government official awaiting audience discovered to her dismay. That unfortunate woman leapt forward from the waiting crowd of petitioners as Prestane passed.
Mr. Prestane, I'm from the Internal Revenue Department. I must see you this morning.
There are thousands of Prestanes. All are addressed as Mr., but I am Prestane of Prestane, head of house and sept, first of the family, chieftain of the clan. I am addressed as Prestane, not Mr. Prestane. Prestane.
He turned and entered his office, where his staff greeted him with a muted chorus.
Good morning, Prestane.
Morning.
Prestane nodded, smiled his basilisk smile, and seated himself behind the enthroned desk while the jaunt watch skirled their pipes and ruffled their drums. Prestane signaled for the audience to begin. The household equerry stepped forward with a scroll. Prestane disdained memo beads and all mechanical business devices.
Report on Prestane Enterprises. Common stock, high 201.5, low 201.25. Average quotations, New York, Paris, Ceylon, Tokyo.
Prestane waved his hand irritably. The equerry retired to be replaced by Black Rod.
Another Mr. Presto to be invested, Prestane.
Prestane restrained his impatience and went through the tedious ceremony of swearing in the 497th Mr. Presto in the hierarchy of Prestane Prestos, who managed the shops in the Prestane retail division. Until recently, the man had had a face and body of his own. Now, after years of cautious testing and careful indoctrination, he had been elected to join the Prestos. After 6 months of surgery and psycho-conditioning, he was identical with the other 496 Mr. Prestos and to the idealized portrait of Mr. Presto, which hung behind Prestane's dais. A kindly, honest man resembling Abraham Lincoln, a man who instantly inspired affection and trust. Around the world, purchasers entered an identical Prestane store and were greeted by an identical manager, Mr. Presto. He was rivaled, but not surpassed, by the Kodak clan's Mr. Quick and Montgomery Ward's Uncle Monty. When the ceremony was completed, Prestane arose abruptly to indicate that the public investiture was ended. The office was cleared of all but the high officials. Prestane paced, obviously repressing his seething impatience. He never swore, but his restraint was more terrifying than profanity.
Foyle, a common sailor, dirt, dregs, gutter scum. But that man stands between me and...
If you please, Prestane, it's 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Pacific Time.
What?
If you please, Prestane, may I remind you that there is a launching ceremony at 9 Pacific Time. You are to preside at the Vancouver shipyards.
Launching?
Our new freighter, the Prestane Princess. It will take some time to establish three-dimensional broadcast contact with the shipyard, so we had better...
I will attend in person.
In person? But we cannot possibly fly you to Vancouver in an hour, Prestane.
I will jaunt.
Such was his agitation. His appalled staff made hasty preparations. Messengers jaunted ahead to warn the Prestane offices across the country, and the private jaunt stages were cleared. Prestane was ushered to the stage within his New York office. It was a circular platform in a black-hung room without windows, a masking and concealment necessary to prevent unauthorized persons from discovering and memorizing coordinates. For the same reason, all homes and offices had one-way windows and confusion labyrinths behind their doors. To jaunt, it was necessary, among other things, for a man to know exactly where he was and where he was going, or there was little hope of arriving anywhere alive. It was as impossible to jaunt from an undetermined starting point as it was to arrive at an unknown destination. Like shooting a pistol, one had to know where to aim and which end of the gun to hold. But a glance through a window or door might be enough to enable a man to memorize the LES coordinates of a place. Prestane stepped on the stage, visualized the coordinates of his destination in the Philadelphia office, seeing the picture clearly and the position accurately. He relaxed and energized one concentrated thrust of will and belief toward the target. He jaunted. There was a dizzy moment in which his eyes blurred. The New York stage faded out of focus. The Philadelphia stage blurred into focus. There was a sensation of falling down and then up. He arrived. Black Rod and others of his staff arrived a respectful moment later. So in jaunts of 100 and 200 miles each, Prestane crossed the continent and arrived outside the Vancouver shipping yards at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. He had left New York at 8 a.m. He had gained 2 hours of daylight. This, too, was a commonplace in a jaunting world. The square mile of unfenced concrete, what fence could bar a jaunter, comprising the shipyard, looked like a white table covered with black pennies, neatly arranged in concentric circles. But on closer approach, the pennies enlarged into the 100-foot mouths of black pits dug deep into the bowels of the earth. Each circular mouth was rimmed with concrete buildings, offices, check rooms, canteens, changing rooms. These were the takeoff and landing pits, the dry dock and construction pits of the shipyards. Spaceships, like sailing vessels, were never designed to support their own weight, unaided against the drag of gravity. Normal Terran gravity would crack the spine of a spaceship like an eggshell. The ships were built in deep pits, standing vertically in a network of catwalks and construction grids, braced and supported by anti-gravity screens. They took off from similar pits, riding the anti-grav beams upward like motes mounting the vertical shaft of a searchlight, until, at last, they reached the Roche limit and could thrust with their own jets. Landing spacecraft cut drive jets and rode the same beams downward into the pits. As the Prestane entourage entered the Vancouver yards, they could see which of the pits were in use. From some, the noses and hulls of spaceships extruded, raised a quarter way or halfway above ground by the anti-grav screen as workmen in the pits below brought their aft sections to particular operational levels. 3 Prestane V-class transports, Vega, Vestal, and Vorga, stood partially raised near the center of the yards, undergoing flaking and replating, as the heat lightning flicker of torches around Vorga indicated. At the concrete building marked entry, the Prestane entourage stopped before a sign that read,
"You are endangering your life if you enter these premises unlawfully. You have been warned."
Visitor badges were distributed to the party, and even Prestane of Prestane received a badge. He dutifully pinned it on, for he well knew what the result of entry without such a protective badge would be. The entourage continued, winding its way through pits until it arrived at O3, where the pit mouth was decorated with bunting in the Prestane colors, and a small grandstand had been erected. Prestane was welcomed and, in turn, greeted his various officials. The Prestane band struck up the clan song, bright and brassy, but one of the instruments appeared to have gone insane. It struck a brazen note that blared louder and louder until it engulfed the entire band and the surprised exclamations. Only then did Prestane realize that it was not an instrument sounding, but the shipyard alarm. An intruder was in the yard, someone not wearing an identification or visitor's badge. The radar field of the protection system was tripped and the alarm sounded. Through the raucous bellow of the alarm, Prestane could hear a multitude of pops as the yard guards jaunted from the grandstand and took positions around the square mile of concrete field. His own jaunt watch closed in around him, looking wary and alert. A voice began blaring on the PA, coordinating defense.
"Unknown in yard. Unknown in yard at E for Edward 9. E for Edward 9. Moving west on foot."
Someone must have broken in.
I'm aware of that.
He must be a stranger if he's not jaunting in here.
I'm aware of that also.
"Unknown approaching D for David 5. D for David 5. Still on foot. D for David 5 alert."
What in God's name is he up to?
You are aware of my rule, sir. No associate of the Prestane clan may take the name of the divinity in vain. You forget yourself.
"Unknown now approaching C for Charlie 5. Now approaching C for Charlie 5.
Black Rod touched Prestane's arm.
He's coming this way, Prestane. Will you take cover, please?
I will not.
Prestane, there have been assassination attempts before. 3 of them.
How do I get to the top of this stand?
Prestane!
Help me up.
Aided by Black Rod, still protesting hysterically, Prestane climbed to the top of the grandstand to watch the power of the Prestane clan in action against danger. Below, he could see workmen in white jumpers swarming out of the pits to watch the excitement. Guards were appearing as they jaunted from distant sectors toward the focal point of the action.
Unknown moving south toward B for Baker 3. B for Baker 3.
Pristine watched the B3 pit. A figure appeared, dashing swiftly toward the pit, veering, dodging, bowling forward. It was a giant man in hospital blues, with a wild thatch of black hair and a distorted face that appeared, in the distance, to be painted in livid colors. His clothes were flickering like heat lightning as the protective induction field of the defense system seared him.
B for Baker 3 alert. B for Baker 3 close in.
There were shouts and a distant rattle of shots, the pneumatic whine of scope guns. Half a dozen workmen in white leapt for the intruder. He scattered them like ninepins and drove on and on toward B3, where the nose of Vorga showed. He was a lightning bolt, driving through workmen and guards, pivoting, bludgeoning, boring forward implacably. Suddenly he stopped, reached inside his flaming jacket, and withdrew a black canister. With a convulsive gesture of an animal writhing in death throes, he bit the end of the canister and hurled it, straight and true on a high arc toward Vorga. The next instant, he was struck down.
Explosive, take cover. Explosive, take cover. Cover.
Pristine!
Pristine shook him off and watched the canister curve up and then down toward the nose of Vorga, spinning and glinting in the cold sunlight. At the edge of the pit, it was caught by the anti-grav beam and flicked upward as by a giant invisible thumbnail. Up and up and up it whirled, 100, 500, 1,000 feet. Then there was a blinding flash, and an instant later, a titanic clap of thunder that smote ears and jarred teeth and bone. Pristine picked himself up and descended the grandstand to the launching podium. He placed his finger on the launching button of the Pristine Princess.
Bring me that man if he's still alive.
He pressed the button.
I christen thee the Pristine Power.
End of episode 3.